In our last session, we started with the section Dayo le'evel shiamod be'evlo. It's enough for the mourner to stay in his position in the mourning, and we had the debate between Rav and Shmuel whether Israel will only be redeemed once they do tshuva, or whether after enough time passes, enough suffering will have occurred either to HaKadosh Baruch Hu or to the Jewish people that they will be redeemed either way. The Gemara, then we...
Please, what page are we on?
I'm reviewing starting on page 67. Now I'm on 69. Then we talked about tshuva klalit, tshuva pratit, that there are two types of tshuva. One is the repentance of the entire return of the entire Jewish people to the land of Israel where they originally sinned. And one is the individual repentance from sins. And most of the Acharonim said that what we are talking about in terms of tshuva that the Rav is talking about is a national return to the land of Israel, not an individual return in tshuva. This is connected to a debate between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. And in this discussion between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, in the end, Rabbi Yoshua is quiet. He ceases to respond to, Rabbi Eliezer is quiet and ceases to respond to Rabbi Yoshua's argument. And normally the Gemara doesn't say that someone's quiet at the end of an argument. You're just allowed to assume that each person remained in his own position. However, we know that shtika kahodai yadami, that silence is the equivalent of an admission, and therefore we see, and it's specific in the Yerushalmi, that in the end, Rabbi Eliezer comes to accept Rabbi Yoshua's position. This brings us up to page 72, Gilui Haketz, the revealed end. After we have discussed, or the Gemara discusses, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua's opinion, the Gemara quotes or brings Rabbi Abba, who we discussed above in the second parak. Va'amar Rabbi Abba, source 1, Rabbi Abba said, Ein lecha ketz megula mizeh. There is no more revealed sign of the coming end than this. Shenamar, as it says in Yecheskel, Ve'atem harei Yisrael, and now the mountains of Israel. An peichem titnu, your limbs you should give. Ufrichem tisu la'ami Yisrael, and your fruit you should raise up for my people Israel. Ki kervu lavo, because soon they will come. Now, the Gemara says va'amar. It doesn't say amar Rabbi Abba. It says ve'amar Rabbi Abba. There's a vav chibur. There's a connection to what was previously here. If we say everyone is sitting in the Beit Midrash at the same time and expressing his opinion, we understand. But Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua were from an early generation of Tanaim. Both of them lived through the destruction of the temple. And Rabbi Abba is in the middle of the period of the Amoraim, approximately 300 years later. Right? Why? So you would expect in such a thing to say Amar Rabbi Abba, not the Amar Rabbi Abba. And Rabbi Abba says. Tzvi the cook was bothered by this and discussed it in Mizmor Yudtet L'Medinat Yisrael. It was his talk on Leil Yom Ha'atzmaut of the 19th anniversary of the State of Israel, which was, of course, just weeks before the Six-Day War. Umahu akesher shebein shnei hamamarim. And what is the connection between these two statements, meaning the statement of the argument of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua on one side, and the statement of Rabbi Abba on the other? Tzrichim anu lomar, we have to say, Eifo she'akesher hu inyani. It is subjective. The subject matter of the two things are the same. Mikevan she'aket enu talui b'tshuva. If we accept Rabbi Yoshua's position that the end of time, the final redemption, is not dependent upon tshuva, sui maskanat tanaim sham, and this is the conclusion of the tanaim there. Ketzad efal o nuchal lahakiro. How is it then that we are going to be able to recognize when this period of redemption is beginning? It is through this, Rabbi Abba is telling us, that Eretz Yisrael begins to produce again fruit in a good measure. Behesper zei b'gemura zachiti lekaven divrei Rabbi Zundel Salanter, Rabbo shel Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, avi tenuat musar. In this explanation of the Gemara, I merited to have the same idea as Rabbi Zundel Salanter, who was the Rebbe of Yisrael Salanter, the father of the Musar movement. Kafi shehuva b'sifro shel Rabbi Natan Friedlander hamazkir et Rabbi Zundel Kamoro v'Rabbo. Like is mentioned in the book of Rabbi Natan Friedland, which we mentioned in our last year, who mentions Rabbi Zundel as his teacher and Rebbe. Now, I want to make an aside that's very interesting. Before the First World War is the time when the citrus industry in the new Yishuv in Eretz Yisrael started taking off. And it was so successful in just a few years that the United States Department of Agriculture was concerned that their exports may significantly eat into American exports of citrus fruit. When you think of the United States, producing in Florida and California, even though they weren't nearly as developed as they are now, having competition from a very small area around Yaffo, and being concerned about it is really stunning. And it shows, I think, how successful the fruit industry was, citrus industry was at that point in Eretz Yisrael. And it's a physical, easily recognizable expression of what the Navi Yechezkel was saying, of V'atem Harei Yisrael, and you, the mountains of Israel, an peichem titnu, spread out your limbs, Ufrichem tisu la'ami Yisrael ki karba lavo, and raise up your fruit for my people Israel, because soon they will come. If redemption were entirely dependent upon tshuva, we would say that how will we know that the redemption is coming? When all of Israel wakes up to do tshuva. But because redemption is not inherently or not only dependent upon tshuva, how are we going to be able to recognize and identify the beginning of this process? That's what Rabbi Abed is saying in his words. He's responding to that question. Often, this is a general principle that most people do not understand, but it is not at all uncommon for the Gemara to be answering a question it has not asked, that you are expected to come up with on your own. This is more common in the Mishnah, but it's not at all uncommon in the Gemara that there's a question in the Gemara that is unanswered, that is unstated. And therefore the Gemara is going to come and answer a question that has not been asked, with the assumption that you will be able to figure out the question. Meaning, if we took Rav's position, if we took Rabbi Eliezer's position, then when Klal Yisrael does tshuva, it's something we should be able to see the difference in people after they've done tshuva before they've done tshuva, and therefore at that point, we should know that redemption is coming afterwards. However, if you sense we have rejected both Rav and Rabbi Eliezer position, and we've adapted Shmuel's position, and we've adapted Rabbi Yoshua's position, and the Yerushalmi specifically says that Rabbi Eliezer gives the final argument for Rabbi Yoshua's position, then how do we identify it? This opened, unstated question is the Amma Rabbi Abba, and Rabbi Abba is coming to answer this question, because he says there is another clear way, an absolute sign of the impending redemption, and that is when Eretz Yisrael gives its fruit in the proper measure. And we've discussed this at length in chapter 2. So let us summarize what we've said up until this point. We have 3 arguments as to why the Gemara says the halacha is like Rabbi Yoshua. First, 3 aleph, we have a general rule. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, halacha Rabbi Yoshua. In any time there is a debate in the Gemara between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, the halacha follows Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Eliezer atzmo, shatak histalek. Rabbi Eliezer himself was quiet in the language of the Bavli, or histalek, he removed himself in the language of the Yerushalmi. V'hoda Rabbi Yoshua, he admitted to Rabbi Yoshua's position. The last one is the continuation of the Gemara itself. Ba'amar Rabbi Abba, the statement of Rabbi Abba is based upon the fact that the Gemara has made a conclusion according to Rabbi Yoshua. If the position would not have been like Rabbi Yoshua's position, there would be absolutely no reason for Rabbi Abba to say what he does. Next section. Zachu achishena. If they merit, it will be immediately. The Midrash, Shemot Rabbah. If we look back at what we've said about the debate between Rav and Shmuel, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Abba's statement, and so on, since repentance is not dependent upon tshuva, redemption is not dependent upon tshuva, why does tshuva help? What do we need tshuva for? So the Midrash says, Shmos Rabbah Kaf He Yud Beit, source 1, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Yisrael, Afal pi shenetati kitzva l'kates shiavo, even though I have put a final end, a measure when the final end has to come, bein osin tshuva, bein she'ein osin, whether they do tshuva or not, but onatahi ba'a, in its season it will come. Im osei tshuva filu yom echad, if they do tshuva, even if it's only for one day, ani mevi ota shelo ba'onata, I will bring it not in its time. Havai hayom im bikolo tishmal, as it says in Psalms, today if you will listen to my voice. There are a number of statements in different places in the Gemara where different people meet Eliyahu and ask when Mashiach is coming, and he says today, and meet him again. It didn't come. Well, that was Hayom b'kolo tishmao. If you had done tshuva, if you had really listened to God on that day, God says the repentance would come immediately. The redemption is, in fact, dependent upon tshuva, and it will come in its time. But the power of tshuva is to advance the time of the redemption. If Jews don't do tshuva before, the redemption will come when it's supposed to come, and we'll have signs of it beforehand and so on. There will be a time period before. Whether they do tshuva or not, it will come in its time. But if they do tshuva, then it's possible to advance the time of redemption. These words, this understanding, fits in with what Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said in that same discussion in the Gemara in Sanhedrin concerning the debate between Rabbi Yoshua. Again, in Sanhedrin, Tzadi Zayin Amud Beis, in source 2, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Rami, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi raises an objection. Ketiv bi'ita, it says in its time, Ketiv achishena. And it says, I will do it quickly. This is a pasuk, 2 words. The pasuk from Yeshaya 60:22. Zachu, if they have the merit of tshuva, achishena, I will make the merit, in that merit, I will make the redemption come quickly. Lo zachu, if they do not have the merit, bi'ita, I will bring the redemption in its set time. So we have 2 possibilities for the redemption. The first possibility is that the redemption will come in its time. The set time that God has established from the beginning of history for the redemption, it will come then. The second possibility is that if the Jews have the merit to advance, they can advance the time of the redemption. And then God can bring it quickly. This merit will only come when Israel returns to God in repentance. Similarly, we have in the Yerushalmi, in Tanit, that we brought above, also in the name of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Source 3, Yerushalmi Tanit, Perak Aleph, Alach Aleph. Rabbi Acha b'shem Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Rabbi Acha said in the name of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Im zechitem, if you have a merit, achishena, I will bring the redemption quickly. V'im lav bi'ita, and if not, I will bring it in its appropriate time. This is the relationship that rabbis give between redemption and repentance. Let us give a parable to explain these things. Let us think about a sick person. He goes to the doctor, and the doctor says to him, take such and such a medicine for a period of 2 weeks, and you'll be healed. The doctor, because he understands the illness and its symptoms, and he knows that a particular medicine taken for a period of time, right, has the ability to cure this illness. However, that does not mean that a particular person with a stronger body, with a stronger metabolism, with more resistance is built up, might be healed after 1 week instead of after 2. So too in terms of the redemption. The master of the world knows the ultimate amount of time that it could take. The time for the redemption, the time it will take to purify to work out the problems of Israel, to be cured from its illness, this takes a specific length of time. And this is what the exile is for. However, this is why we say, Rofei Cholei Amot Yisrael, who cures the illnesses of his people Israel, referring not only to physical ailments, but spiritual illnesses as well. So too, when a person is capable of overcoming his physical ailments faster, so too with the power of return to the Torah and to its mitzvos and to good deeds, one can shorten the length, or not, maybe not one, but Klal Yisrael can shorten the length of exile. Just like a sick person, the medicine can cure him within a specific time, but he can get cured faster, and it's an internal issue for him, how strong his internal organs are, and so on. So too, it's what's going on inside Klal Yisrael, that how much of a netiyah to God there is or not. I am reminded of one of the first of the kibbutzim that was, of course, very, very careful, in their education of their young children, not to, have them, God forbid, think of how do I say this? Any knowledge of God, any thinking of God, anything like that, because, that's just pure heresy and so on. And so they were very careful in their education of their young people that they should be good atheists. And they were shocked when the people of their own started using the word God, when the children on their own were using the word God. And they wrote to Burl Katznelson, one of the leading ideologues of the labor movement, asking, how it was possible. They were so careful that their children shouldn't be polluted in such a way. How was it that they are using the word God, that they've created the word God? And Burl Katznelson said, do you think that after 2,000 years of exile, that God would allow himself to be forgotten in his own language? Very interesting statement coming from an atheist. Continuing, Kami nifsak, like whom do we decide the relationship between redemption and repentance? That redemption will come in its time in any case, but the power of tshuva can speed the time of redemption, comes clearly can be clearly expressed in the words of the Rishonim and the Achronim, the early and later rabbinic authorities, and we will look at a few of their words. Let's start with one of the earliest philosophical works that we have from Rav Sadia Gaon in his Sefer Emunot V'Deot. Like almost all the early philosophical works, it was, of course, originally written in Arabic, and we have a translation. Ma'aminim enachnu shu natan l'shibudenu shnei zmanim. we believe that he gave to our enslavement 2 times. One is the time it will take if we do tshuva, and the second is the ultimate end of days. Whichever of them comes first, we will be fitting for redemption. If we do tshuva, we don't have to look to, or perhaps a better translation would be to wait for the end. And if we do not do tshuva properly, then we will have to remain in exile until the end. Yadanu she'im tshuvatenu lo tiyeh shlema. We know that if our tshuva is not complete, nishar ad sheyashlim haketz, then we will have to wait for the end. But kasher yishalem haketz, and when the end has been completed, meaning when we reach that point in history, v'lo nashuv, and we still have not returned, efshari shetiyeh ha'yeshua ve'anachnu chotim, then it is possible for there to be a salvation even though we are still sinning. V'kevan she'erach hazman v'lo avnu, and once the time has been expended to this point and we haven't returned, yachzerenu b'li tshuva, God will bring us back to Eretz Yisrael even without repentance. Let us look at what Rashi has to say on the following pasuk. To examine Rashi, we first, of course, have to look at the verse in Yeshayahu. Al har gavoa alilach, on a har mountain I go up to you, mevaseret Zion, the one announcing Zion. Of course, everyone knows that mevaseret Zion today is an out settlement of Jerusalem on the main road from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It means literally the announcer. Mevaser is one giving news, that one announcing Zion. Harimi b'koach kolech, raise up with strength your voice. Mevaseret Yerushalayim, the one that is announcing Jerusalem. Harimi al tiri, raise it up, do not be afraid. Imri la'are Yehuda, speak to the cities of Yehuda. Hinei Elokeichem, behold your God. Rashi, Mevaseret Zion, the one who is announcing Jerusalem. Navia d'mvasrin l'Zion, the prophets that are announcing to Zion. V'imkom acher hu amar, in another place he says, Ragli mevaser, my feet will announce. This is in Parak 52 of Yeshaya. Zachu kal kezachar, lo zachu ta'ashken nekeva. If they have proper zechuyot, they will be as fast as a running man. If not, they will be as weak as a woman. Umi acher pamav ad haketz, and that's walking slowly to the end. That is to say, there is a mevaseret Zion. There is something announcing to Zion. V'yesh mevaser, and there is also an announcement. They're 2 different things. Mevaseret and mevaser. Hanavim mevasrei hagula bizmana bi'ita. The prophets are announcing the redemption in its time. And bebechinat mevaseret. This is the announcer. Hamitkabenet li'ita, that slowly draws near, Kima Kima, little by little, ad bo hamoed haketz, until the time comes, the end. But it's also possible that there could be zachu, that they could have a merit, in which case the process of redemption will be mevaser, much more quickly, kal kazacher, as fast as a running man. And we will perceive the footsteps in any case more clearly in that situation than we will in the situation of lo zachu, when there's not a merit, when the redemption comes in its time. And we see this in Rashi, on Yeshayahu, Kaf Aleph Yud Beit, Im bitayun ba'yu, if you come as you come. Im tivakshu bakashtchem lemaher haket shuvu atiyu b'tshuva. If you want to request to speed up the end, then you have to return in tshuva. The pasuk that Rashi is the words that Rashi is explaining are im betayun bayu. If you will demand, you will demand. If you will come, you will come. It's a very difficult phrase to understand. So Rashi says, listen, if you want, you have the possibility to bring geula when you want it. If not, it'll be when it is. Geula will come, and if you want, you can make it faster. If you return to God in true repentance. And so you see here how Rashi in all of these places is expressing the difference between kates, be'ito, the final end in its time, and tshuva nachishena, that if you do tshuva, it is possible to bring it more quickly. On the pasuk of Tehillim, the Ki gadol me'al shemaim chastecha, your kindness is greater than above heaven. Ve'al shachakim amitecha, and tell the heavens is your truth. The Radak comments on that verse. Aval ha'geula, but the redemption. Al kol panim tiyeh bizmana. In any case, it will be in its time. Bein zakaim, bein chayavim, whether they have merits or whether they're guilty. Elashim niyeh zakaim, yachish ita. But if we have the appropriate merits, then it will be brought sooner in its time. There is in the Sephardic school of thought, represented by Rabbeinu Bechaye in several places, Kuzari, Sefer Ikarim, and so on, the Barbanel. Another way of looking at it, based upon psukim from Vayikra. And I don't want to divide that into two classes, so we're going to do it next time. However, as a way of a very, very brief way of introduction, in the end of Vayikra, we have that if a person has to sell his inheritance, that it can be redeemed. You're talking about an ancestral inheritance, going back to the division of land in the time of Yahushua, that the person has the right to redeem it before the Yovel, or one of his relatives can redeem it because it's an embarrassment for the family if the ancestral land is not being held by someone in the family. And if not, if no one in the family, not the seller, not anyone else, manages to redeem this before the Yovel comes, then when the Yovel comes, the land returns in any case, in all instances. And this idea, the Rabbeinu Bechaye develops the idea at length, and others follow his footsteps, is that if we do tshuva, this is the idea of is parallel to buying, redeeming the land, then we can make it happen sooner. We can make the redemption happen sooner. And however, if we fail to do that, then in any case, when the Yovel arrives, i.e. the set time for the end arrives, then we will be redeemed no matter what happens. We'll pick up from here next week.